The following program is an all-language show which includes open discussions on topics related to the LGBTQ+ community and beyond, including, but not limited to mature subject matters such as sex and sexuality, personal experiences, and more. We aim to create a respectful and inclusive space for all. Listener discretion is advised. The views and opinions expressed are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the producers and this outlet. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations and so much more.
Hi, this is Emily Saliers from Indigo Girls, and you're listening to Rainbow Country.
Today on Rainbow Country, queering the interior. That and more up next, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hello, my name is Conchita.
And I'm Barbecue.
And my name is Hardcora. And we are the B Girls.
You're listening to
Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT FM in Toronto and now proudly in syndication across Canada. Thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, as well as being a #1 Canadian LGBT podcast. So today, a spotlight on my 2022 interview with award-winning filmmaker Amy Bohagan, who joins me to talk about her film, Queering the Interior, a short documentary about the queer history of the British Columbia interior. We'll find out about the making of Queering the Interior and so much more. Plus in hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house. And on this episode, I'm featuring some classic 90s, some queer Latin, and more. All that lies ahead on this journey through Rainbow Country and our first stop, the Rainbow Country Bookstore. Today, The Maynard's God. Author Karen Michelson reads from her award-winning novel, The Maynard's God, a novel that tells a story of murder, music, spirituality, and queer romance.
I kept looking at him, at his words and dark hair and smiling dark eyes and arrestingly classical features, trying to know who he was right now. I kept seeing his performances and hearing all his poetry and his music. Bass lines, lines of poetry. The ancients didn't separate poetry from music. Anyone touched or tainted with enough divinity to do one did both, because there wasn't a both. There was only the compulsion of verse. Didn't verse once mean a turning into? Wasn't the first act of creation the universe, meaning the one turning into, as in God turning itself into everything it wanted, as in poets turning one line into another, one section of music into the next, or the artist turning your own emptied life into whatever you wanted to be before the world? Make me a hero so I can speak freely. I'll pay you with applause. He belonged to another line, to the scattered procession of Dionysus's heedlessly illegitimate children, like passion flowers lurking out of the mad corners of old centuries, who for all their divine pretense couldn't be anything other than what they were, who could do nothing but strum lutes and mandolins and bass guitars and chant prose poems to keep misfits awake and dreaming for generations. What was it like to be so helplessly powerful with an energy, so attractive it keeps pulsing in open hearts through centuries? He was closer to the words I read at night than to me. That alone made me know he was already closer to me than my own words. I gazed across the quiet water, bird in the distance like a lost sea pigeon, then gone. I knew I had some power here. It was entirely up to me whether I saw him again. He would come to New England and perform, but I needn't insist he visit me when he came. I could go home, go back to the drug war, see the McCrae case to its end, and there an end. I could say what I wanted to say, get in my car, make the long trip home right now. I would feel foolish, maybe even sick. I would be afraid of my own dreams for a while, and music would make me feel desolate. But at least I would know for the rest of my life that I had said it, that I was once moved enough to say it. If I needed to, I could always pretend that this conversation never happened and comfort myself in knowing that no one would ever have to know how deeply the pretending cut. Thought of all the books I'd read on fall days because the stories were better than anything I found in life. Hated the betrayal when the books ended. Needed the fiction to get through the social hypocrisy that tore me apart every day. Hated the need. Knew I would hate myself worse if I didn't have the need. Felt the same surge I'd only felt once before in my life, when a suspect caused me to make a snap decision and shoot to kill. Knew I was likely killing again. That I was risking the remnant of my true self that had somehow evaded society's jackboots. I love you. Done. I'd never found anybody I could honestly say that to before. Anybody I could honestly imagine enough to love. He was a painting, a myth, a melody that wouldn't stop. Loved the way the bard sang about it. A last chance at belief before the absolute horror of nothing set in for the rest of my life. More cold and deadly than the deadly contrast of this moment. I'd said my prayer. Please, God, have mercy. Don't say you don't exist. Cool. I love you too. But the band wasn't trying to lose me or bring me in. I was there, and they were there, and Jade seemed quietly all right with it. So the rest of them were. Item. No one offered me information on the Rome murder or anything else, and I didn't ask, because I couldn't bring myself to trespass against the sacredness of our communion. It was a natural coming together for a night. My first. Marty kept passing bottles around to wild pledges. We drank to the CN Tower. We drank to Queen's Park as we sat passing stories under a tree there like Canterbury pilgrims flying at a verbal jam session. Les told tales of Juilliard. They used to put razor blades between the piano keys to encourage accuracy in playing. Did it work? Sometimes, he said dryly. We made up glary nursery rhymes. We drank to the Queen. We drank on the steps of the Parliament building under gracious arches that looked like the facade of another century. And Jade was moving pictures through words and beer, and we were all doing our drunken best to help. I don't remember the pictures, but one had fire and burned when we spoke it. We were a shadow government holding court and trying the night. Innocent and dark as stars turning out into space. No one could touch the little circle of our feeling. We called down storms and pretended to see them. And then we ran loose all over the city, and at one point it rained, and we drank to the Royal Ontario Museum. Or maybe that was Sunday, and we took shelter in the museum's planetarium where the rain scorched the roof and so made the sound of whatever the universe constantly expands into. We sang old songs. And then we drank to the Arctic plain of Canada, stretching into the planet's empty night. I don't know where we went and where we were. The afternoon was spare and gray except for us. The city was kind. I think we ate. I think I paid. The night came again all moony before I left. We walked through dreams and sang. Marty displayed his insanity without apology, and Les kept trying to get me lost in logical propositions that resolved themselves in dry-witted jokes, and Xander kept shadowboxing with visions in the air, and Jade was simply with me more often than not, keeping the spirit of everything I ever wanted, holding and intense.
Up next, Queering the Interior.
Hi, I'm Garrett Conley, author of Boy Erased, a memoir. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Singing Out's Iconique, a Pride celebration, is a show that will resonate with both the queer community and allies alike. With a repertoire of anthems from influential queer artists, it promises to be a night of unforgettable performances, reflecting the strength, diversity, and resilience of the 2S LGBTQIA+ community. Singing Out's Iconique, a Pride celebration, is on Saturday, June 7th at 7 p.m., located at Kerner Hall, TELUS Centre for Performance and Learning in Toronto. As an official part of Toronto Pride Month, we couldn't be more proud. For more information, visit singingout.com.
Hi, I'm Joey Lamar, best-selling author of Mambo Lips and Salsa Hips, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Amy Bohegan, hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am well. I am better now that I am speaking to you, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond. So thank you for that, especially to talk about Queering the Interior. This is your documentary. Talk to me about this documentary. It's a short. It's about 45 minutes or so.
That's right. It's kind of mid-length.
Yeah. What is this documentary about?
Well, we wanted to highlight some of the pioneers of our rural queer community here in Nelson and the Kootenays, which is basically southern British Columbia, southern interior. And we knew we had a really rich, vibrant community that was unique to a lot of rural spaces. And our local museum commissioned this documentary as part of a exhibit that was also going up about the queer history here in this region last summer for Pride. And so we were going to do a short 10-minute piece. And when I got deeper into the research and started talking to the key people that I felt like kind of held this history, it was really obvious that we needed to expand the film. And so the director of the Museum and Art Gallery at what was formerly called Touchstones is now called the Nelson Museum Archives and Art Gallery, Astrid Heyerdahl and I worked together, and I said, we have to expand this. There's too many stories to tell. And so we did do a 10-minute piece to cut into the exhibit last summer. And then we created this 45-minute piece a few months later and released it this last summer to the community at the theater. And it was just kind of a celebration and also just a tribute to these folks that have really pushed for visibility and rights in our community and in a rural space, which is traditionally not where a lot of queer people choose to live. Mm. Yeah.
So you just mentioned that this was commissioned by the art gallery, I believe.
That's right. There's an archive, museum, and art gallery that was formerly called Touchstones. It's now called Nelson Museum Archives and Art Gallery. And they were the ones who really wanted to bring this into the into their space. Yes.
And why did they want to do this? Was there like an LGBT component to the gallery?
Well, I think they've recognized under Astrid's leadership that they have been missing a lot of voices in that museum for, the time that they had begun, and it didn't represent the full spectrum of our community. It was a lot of history about loggers and miners and a little bit of indigenous history that was really from the settler point of view. And so they've really made efforts in the last 5 years to bring in these kind of missing voices. And this was part of that intention, as well as having a pride exhibit, which was a huge part of that vision as well. Like, so having an entire exhibit in the space that was all about queer history. And Michael Wicks, who has been living in this community for many years, in the 70s, 80s, and then moved away and came back a few years ago, he's been working on building a queer archives. And so he's really interested in preserving and kind of collecting and celebrating queer history through the museum archives. And so because there was actually some materials to work with, both video and lots of photos and documents from different meetings over the years, I felt like, there was enough to work with as a filmmaker, and the museum also felt the same way, that there was material to work with as a documentary filmmaker. You kind of need something. So that's when we decided to go ahead and make this film. So then Michael Wicks became instrumental, and he was actually featured in the film as well. So because he's been an activist in this community for many years and is still very active in collecting that history.
So the documentary features a number of members of the LGBT community. How did you go about selecting who would be interviewed for the documentary?
Well, partly small town fashion. I mean, by knowing a lot of people personally that I knew I could at least reach out and connect, because I'm in the queer community myself and have lived here since 2006. I moved into a very vibrant queer community and knew some of the people who had been working on the front lines, who started Pride in 1996 here, and TransConnect, the first rural program that supports trans folks. So I kind of knew, and I've done the work as a documentary filmmaker here for 15 years. I knew a fair number of those people. Now, that being said, there's many people I didn't know, and lots of folks from the 70s and 80s who surfaced only through conversations with folks I knew from the 90s and aughts that were basically saying, oh, you have to talk to Robert, you have to talk to Henry. They were these awesome hairdressers from that era. And, make sure you talk to Sophia, make sure you talk to Norma. And, of course, you've got to talk to Christopher. And so, of course, small towns are easy that way. You kind of, if you're a known entity already, people can open up a little faster to you. I'm not coming off the CBC van putting a microphone in people's faces. I'm kind of a living here, and I was part of the community. So just one conversation after another. I had a research assistant. We called dozens and dozens of people, had hours and hours of conversations, and just started piecing together what were the key moments, who were the key people, what was really important about, what happened over the years. And we really want to represent the spectrum of the community as well, not just a lesbian, gay perspective, but the two-spirited voices, the trans voices, the bisexual, everything. We really wanted to try to represent the full spectrum of the community. So that was part of the intention as well.
And some of the footage, the archival footage that you guys have, I'm sure from people's personal collections, like photos and videos, that must have been a process.
Yeah, I think when you get in a documentary, you're somewhat in denial about how much footage you have to go through. But every documentary I've ever done, it's kind of like, well, yeah, there's, a lot of hours to move through. But I think that's part of the process, is you start learning what's out there through the material and who was important. And so it's part of the whole creative process. And of course, I have help doing that as well. It's not just me for hours, but I do think that, we have a lot to, be grateful for, and that Michael Wicks collected a lot of that. And then because we were in touch with so many people were really behind the project, they would send me lots of things. And so we got to build the archives through this process as well. We just got more and more footage and more pictures. And so just the archives keeps getting stronger.
Did anything surprise you during the process of researching this documentary? And and the stories of Nelson?
I think being someone who came out in the mid 90s, or kind of the early to mid 90s, myself as a lesbian, and going through college and feeling like it was a hidden identity that was just starting to get visibility both on TV and kind of on college campuses. I feel like I certainly knew, I paid attention to the history of the queer community, but I think when you talk to people face to face and you really pay attention to the stories of folks who came before you, or elders, if you will, I think you really feel like, there's nothing like a personal story to really bring it all together for you. Like when you learn about Harvey and Milk, and you learn about folks in Stonewall and the things like the Toronto bathhouses, you certainly feel connected to that. But it happened somewhere else. And all the people I talked to, they grew up here, they moved here. And so when it's right in your own backyard, I'm literally walking to meet people for coffee who've lived here for decades to talk about the fact that they were gay bashed in the same alleys that I walk down every day. Like, I think not a surprise per se, but kind of a revelation of the sacrifices people made just to be who they were, and knowing that we all have. But I came on their backs. I was able to come out of that, their generation, and come into my own generation. And now we have young people in droves that are finding space in school that I would have never dreamed of. So, I mean, I'm kind of I would say like a sandwich generation in a couple of ways, like, almost 50, and I've got kids of my own who are teaching me about the language around non-binary and gender diversity. Right. And so we've got a long way to go. Kids are still very marginalized, but I think that the surprise element for me was just the kind of beautiful people I met along the way were just amazing to see how much they have been able to lay the foundation for the rest of us.
In queering the interior, during the course of the documentary, there are a number of issues that face the LGBT community. Obviously, homophobia, trans issues, coming out stories, the effect of colonization on the Two-Spirit community. These issues that came up during the documentary, did that happen organically, just as you were asking people questions and interviewing them and filming them, or was there a roadmap of certain things that you wanted to touch on?
I think a little bit of both. I think that's the kind of artistic process of making a documentary. Like, you write what we call a treatment rather than a script, because a treatment's kind of a suggestion of what you think has happened based on the research you've done. And then that's usually, you've probably done some pre-interviews by that point. You've talked to a number of people, and you've cast your folks that you want in the film. But in terms of trans history or two-spirited history, like, it's also about knowing ahead of time whose voices you would like to include. And then from that point forward, you just hope that the right stories do emerge. I mean, for sure, for me as a white settler here, I didn't know much about the two-spirited voices that were in our community, never mind the history of what that meant. And I think, like a lot of folks that are settlers, we don't have a lot of dialogue going. So film's a great way to start understanding that as a first step. And now I think the folks that were in the film, as well as other two-spirited voices and people in our community, are a little better understood, especially within our own queer community here. So yeah, it's like a bit of a chicken and egg situation documentary. It's a dance that I really do love. Like, I love that I don't know exactly where it's going, and it kind of leads you, but you also have to have some idea of who you want and what you're trying to say. And that's the research for sure.
Queering the Interior. That's the title of this documentary. Where does this title come from?
Well, I think the verb is important because it's still happening. And like, I think it's about, there's a lot of books now that are, this actually shares the title with some other book I think a couple gay guys wrote about interior design, funnily enough. When I Googled it, I was like, okay, I think I can live alongside that. We're different enough. We're not a documentary about interior design, but like, I I think it's about the fact that people actively took their space. They literally, decided, yes, I could go and live in Vancouver, Toronto, or San Francisco in the 80s, especially in those time frames. But I've decided to live here. And what that meant for them was to literally be authentic to who their queer identity was. And then living in the interior. I mean, it's all about this film specifically is about taking that space in a rural area, which is typically not where queer people have set up camp. So I mean, of course, there's queer people everywhere in the world, and there's lots of rural folks, but we don't see their stories as much. So I think it's really actively trying to name what it's all about is basically people taking space in an interior, and also the interior of our own lives, right? Like our inner landscapes and stuff. So you can take that lots of different deep directions, but that's kind of the title and the intention of it.
And on that note, we'll return after this Rainbow Country update.
Hi, I'm Keegan Hurst, former professional rugby player, coach, raving homosexual, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Hello, Rainbow Country. I'm Eli Shivi, Executive Director of the Inside Out Toronto 2S LGBTQ+ Film Festival. And I'd like to invite you to this year's landmark 35th Anniversary Festival, where we'll be featuring bold, transformative stories from around the world. With over 100 films, docs, shorts, and series to choose from, the 35th Annual Inside Out Toronto 2S LGBTQ+ Film Festival runs from May 23rd to June 1st. In person at the TIFF Lightbox and online across Ontario. For more information, simply visit insideout.ca.
Hi, I'm Jamie B. of TG CD Style Toronto, and I'm a professional feminization makeup artist and stylist providing male-to-female transformations and mentoring to those who identify as a cross-dresser or a trans woman. I first heard of Rainbow Country and Mark Tara in trying to find a radio station that specifically caters to the LGBT community, and I'm so grateful I found this station. It's crucial having a platform like Rainbow Country that welcomes all aspects of the queer community, including allies like myself and what I do. It casts a spotlight on specific needs and interests of human beings, ensuring that people from all walks of life are being validated. It's a real privilege to be able to work with cross-dressers and trans women by helping them align themselves with their feminine energy through the glorious feminization process. So, I want to thank Rainbow Country and Mark Tara for providing this platform for all of us.
So, as you may know, Rainbow Country is an award-winning gay radio show, working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And is heard on broadcast radio, streaming, as well as an edited podcast. So if you think what I'm doing here, working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond, is worthwhile, I hope you'll consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. If you're listening to the podcast version, I hope you'll consider making a donation to an outlet that does carry Rainbow Country. How can you do that? Well, simple. Simply head over to marktara.ca, where everything is connected, and hit the donations banner. That's where you'll find a list of all the outlets that carry Rainbow Country, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. Let your voice, let your support be heard.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station specifically for our issues to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us. And of course our artists and the things that we do globally and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
Hi, this is Michael Anthony Alago, music executive, photographer, author, and you are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, Amy, you've written, you've produced, you've directed award-winning films for broadcast TV, on digital platforms, for film festivals. How did you get into filmmaking in the first place? How did this all come about for you?
Yeah, I mean, the real reason is I'm just really curious and I love people's stories, and don't we all? Like, why wouldn't I want to do that professionally? Like, if we go to a dinner party, the best part is hearing, the fun stories or the interesting, dramatic stories people have. So if I'm already doing that, why not do it professionally? But I took a bit of a detour after I was like doing it as a hobby as a kid. I kind of, not a detour, I certainly intended to be in education. And I was a teacher for many years in various settings. I came back to it when I moved to Nelson about 15 years ago. So hasn't been my adult profession forever, but I just knew I wanted to do something creative, and I felt like having a camera was an invitation into other people's worlds. And if I could do that, and learn about other people and why they do what they do, then why wouldn't I do that? So, it's kind of always a bit of a amazement to me that I'm able to get paid to kind of knock on people's doors with the camera and go in and ask them lots of questions about their lives. And then I get the process of putting it all together with a team of people that I really enjoy working with. So I'm just really fortunate to have really grown into this profession, and I get to, explore these topics that have a lot of meaning for me personally, as well as, for trying to have impact and tell stories that I think will maybe change the needle just a little, move the needle just a little bit on social issues. So a lot of the work I do has a lot to do with marginalized voices. So that fits right into the mission of what I do for my work.
Watershed Productions, Inc. This is your award-winning production house. You guys do documentaries, commercials, episodic TV. What led you then to create Watershed Productions, Inc.?
Yeah, I mean, it was just the place I housed kind of my ambition to tell these kind of stories. And Watershed to me represents community. So much of my work actually happens right here. Like, I sometimes can pack the gear that I'm working with, meet my crew, and walk to our location. I think I have kids and, they're teenagers now, but I've really tried to stay in one place a little bit more than I could have if I lived in a bigger city and been flying places. But I feel like our local is really important. And so regional local stories to me, that's the watershed part of it for me. And, also the watershed moments of our lives. So we try to capture what's been kind of seminal in people's lives or seminal moments in our community. And documenting has always been something I've really enjoyed doing. And now it's moved in a little bit further to, I'm working on a scripted TV series that's more based in a comedy genre. And like I came out of the last film that I made that was a documentary about our town and all the characters that live here and focused on the municipal election. And there was definitely comedic elements in that, but I felt like I would like to try my hand at a new genre. And so I'm working with a writing team, and I'm creating a show called Southern Interior, actually, to borrow the word interior, that kind of looks at all the different ways that we live together in this community and the different lifestyles that we have here that I think are quite unique to any other rural area. I dare you to come to any other rural area this size and find the variety and the types of lifestyles you'll find in Nelson. So I'm fascinated by it. So now I'm kind of exploring that in a new way.
And it's not about making your interiors look Southern.
Yeah, I'm not writing a book alongside it. Exactly.
So watershed moments. You are lesbian. You have kids, and that's a huge watershed moment, having kids. But growing up, first of all, did you know that you had same-sex attraction, that you were attracted to other women, or was that something that happened later on in life for you? And did you want kids growing up as well?
Those are some good questions. Well, I think like a lot of queer kids, there were hints of it that in retrospect you go, right. Like that gym teacher clearly knew I was one of those kids. But I was the tomboy. I mean, I was really typically kind of like that little baby dyke that I'm sure lots of other people could see. But I'm not like it wasn't that straightforward for me, like literally and figuratively. Like I think that I definitely felt the attraction for women in college. That's where I met my first girlfriend, and that's when I came out to my parents, somewhat accidentally. But it just kind of all snowballed. By the end of college, I was kind of half out to some of my friends, and it was just a little bit of a messy time for anybody coming out. I think we can all relate to the fact that like we don't even really know like who around us might be gay because we're kind of closeted at that point to ourselves, never mind to everyone else. Like, especially in the mid 90s, like by the time I got to the end of college, I thought, well, I'm going to go to San Francisco. First of all, I just broke up with my girlfriend and I thought it was a great idea to follow her out there. So really great choice. But that first year in San Francisco, kind of realized like there's a whole world out here, right? It wasn't also roses and pride parades every day. So I felt like there was a reality there to living in San Francisco that I wasn't ready to meet, even though there was a huge queer community waiting there. So that was nice for a year, but then I kind of turned around and kind of did a few other things with my time and didn't stay in California. Eventually settled in Boston and then went to Toronto and then eventually out to Nelson. So when I met my wife in Toronto, by that point, I was a few years in and no, it wasn't on my mind to have kids. I really don't think that was a narrative a lot of my lesbian friends had at that point. Even as we got into our early 20s, I think we were still fighting for marriage equality. It was like one step at a time here. And so personally, what's really kind of incongruent about that is that I had worked with kids as an educator for a long time. I was probably the most youth oriented person in my peer group. And yet I still didn't think of myself being a mother. So that's the extent to which I think queer people can repress what could be a natural instinct for them. Now, when I met Jane, we did start talking about it a couple years into our relationship as a way to just kind of explore and maybe put that question to rest. Like a lot of women in their late 30s and early 40s kind of feel like they have to make that decision intentionally. And I think we kind of felt like, well, let's at least put it to rest. And when we really explored it, we kind of went, actually, we kind of want to try this. Like, not just try it. Let's do this. Like, let's full on commit to going down this path. And we decided adoption was our best fit. For a few different reasons, but it's just such a personal choice. And we've got lots of friends who've done all sorts of ways of having kids these days. So we just decided adoption and we went down that road. And within a year, we were matched with our twin boy girl, Franny and Theo. And now they were 15 months old when we brought them home. And now they're 15 years old next week. So
wow,
it's been a journey for sure.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's been a journey. Why did you move to Nelson?
Yeah, well, I don't move places out of logic. I've noticed in my life. I did my move to San Francisco following my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. I moved to Toronto to try to save a relationship. I didn't move to Nelson to save a relationship. I moved here because Jane had lived here for 6 months on a sabbatical from her full-time job in Toronto. So I came to visit her once when she was here, and then a couple more times together when we were, looking at maybe moving out of Toronto. And just, like anyone who's ever been in this part of the country and in this part of BC, it's gorgeous, but not just that, it's the people. It's the people who are just, there's a way this place has grown over the decades, layers of these incredibly tolerant and, accepting kind of community here. And I there's definitely there's many sides to that. It's not all perfect every day, but I do think if I wanted to live in a rural area, this was a place that I felt. And so, I felt like was going to be really safe and accepting for us. And there was a really vibrant lesbian community here. Of the 90s, droves of lesbians moved here from cities like Vancouver and like Northern California and in Toronto. And like, we just became a known entity because there was so many gay men that lived here in the 80s, and that lesbians started to see this as a queer friendly community. And that literally made all the difference for us, because had that not been here, I don't think it would have been on the radar for us. It was really important that we be part of that community. So Nelson, yeah, just it captures lots of people for different reasons, but it's always the same story at the end of the day. Like, you love the beauty of it, you love the people and the community vibe, and that's why most of us are here. Yeah.
Well, Rainbow Country airs in Nelson on what, CJLY?
Yeah, that would be our local Kootenai Co-op.
Yes. Yeah. So hey, Nelson.
Hey, Nelson, what's up?
So where were you born?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, wow.
And Midwestern gal. And my family, my parents are there, as well as some of my extended family. And I do go back there and visit. And I've got friends on different coasts in the States. And so I get back and cross that border every now and then and dip back down to the States, cheer for the Cardinals, that kind of thing. Yep.
And what made you move to Canada then?
Right. Well, again, like I said, this is the third bad move of my life. Like the second bad move. My third move was the best, out to Nelson. When I finally got the relationship right with Jane. Well, I was in a relationship. It was kind of like long distance for a couple years after I went to grad school with this woman. And she was in Toronto and I was in Boston, and we just couldn't find a way for her to come to Boston. So I said, well, I'm going to just check it out. I'm going to see what Toronto's all about. So out of pure stubbornness, because I was tired of being in a long distance relationship, I kind of packed everything up and went up to Toronto and just to give it a try. And I was pretty much ready to come back and pack it back to Boston, because that was kind of where my best friends in my life had been for a few years. And I got a job directing summer camp and outdoor education center, which for me was kind of a culminating point in my career as an educator. So I took that and just stayed. I stayed for about 5 years in Toronto. And towards the last 2 or 3 years I was in Toronto, that's when I met Jane, my current partner and wife. So, good things can happen out of not so great choices. It's, something that happens a lot in all of our lives. Like, one thing leads to another. And I think, I tried to make the best of it. And look, I got, this amazing life out of being in Canada. So honestly, when you think about what's happening in the States and some of the rights that are being taken away, systematically, I feel really grateful that I'm in Canada. Not that I'm necessarily consider myself a political refugee or anything too extreme, but there is a way in which it becomes an intentional choice to be here rather than there after a few years, right? And I didn't think of myself moving back to the States necessarily when I got to Nelson, because I do love it here, but at this point, I just can't imagine it. It's a tough place to get your head around living at this point, as compared to Canada, I should say.
So queering the interior, it's a well done, well made, powerful documentary telling some of Canadian gay history, in my opinion. What's the plan for this documentary? How will Canadians be able to see this?
Well, it's a good question. I've been thinking about how to answer this because right at this point, we'll have access to it through the Nelson Museum and Archives website. So if you were to Google Nelson Museum and Archives and Gallery, you'd be able to watch it via their website. That being said, the piece could easily be kind of reworked so that it's less. I feel right now it's very specific to our area, and there's ways in which I think it could be, not to say to take out the local specificity, but to make it even more Canadian kind of, so that people can relate to it outside of this region, because it was really the real intention was to share it with our regional audience here as a museum piece. I think because it started out like for the exhibit as to document our queer history here, and then it kind of expanded. It hasn't really thought of itself as a Canadian film per se. Like some of the other films that I've done, there's an audience beyond the walls of our region in mind when you're making it. But with this one, it was really, to me, honestly, I was hoping that we could show it. The main audience would be young people in schools that live in this region, and that feels really rewarding on a level, because there's a lot of films that you try to reach for like millions of people to see through a broadcast, and this one is like, if the person who came up to me after the film, not if, the person who came up to me after the film first was a young trans man who said, "Oh my God, like, first off, I want to be part of the Trans Connect program. Where do I go to be in the Trans Connect program? Because that's part of what's in the film." Through Christopher Moore's incredible work, and like literally was looking for resources right there and then. And I thought, well, if that's what we're doing with this film, is to connect young people who watch it to the resources that we have already built in this community, then fantastic. So not to say I don't want other people to see it, because that's not what a filmmaker really wants. They want to have an audience for their film, but definitely you can see it through the Nelson Museum and Archives website, as well as have been some festivals and some groups that have played it. So if people are interested in screening this film, we certainly have had like at least half a dozen groups that have hosted evenings where, like, it's for Pride or for Advocacy Canada here in BC is going to be showing it as part of their they're going to have a panel. They're going to have like a entire night dedicated to the film. Like, so there's ways in which community groups around have been able to use the film and show it. And I think it's had a really good impact, especially if someone like Robert Varigan, who's featured in the film, is part of Advocacy Canada. He'll be on the panel. So he will be there at the screening and kind of bring voice to to personalize the film as well. So that's been really great. But for sure, requests for screening the film have come to the Nelson Museum, not to myself, but they've come to the Nelson Museum because they're the producers of this film.
And is there any, or was there any, like, did you guys do a festival run or anything like that for the
Not
film?
really, not formally, no. There's a few reasons for that. But yeah, just wanted again to have our audience be more of the folks in this region at this point. And like that doesn't leave the festival run off the table. Like I said, I kind of feel like if this film was going to have a festival run, it might need to be reworked a little bit just to make it a little bit more relevant to an audience outside of here. But that's just my my perspective on the film. I think you don't want to lose those specific stories, but so much of what happens when you're watching this film, if you live here, is, oh, there's that place or that's that person. And
sure.
so there's that kind of like feeling of like all this familiarity. And I think we would have to look at the film through the eyes of someone who didn't live here, and maybe not entirely restructure it, but like rework it so that there was a little bit less specificity there.
As someone who's not in BC, or let alone Nelson, but here in Toronto, and watching this film, I was like, wow, this is amazing. Because who knew back in the 70s that they were like, gay guys coming together and creating a community and using, a couple's backyard and building, an area that they can access and use year after year after year to come and celebrate. And That's powerful because sure, it's a local story, but it's a Canadian story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is what's so important about Queering the Interior. So well done to you and the people at the gallery.
Yeah, well, thank you. And it's nice to hear it impacted you. And I think there's plenty of elements of the film that are incredibly relatable to all aspects of our community.
Yeah.
And I think there has been definitely conversation about how to repurpose the film for a bigger audience. And I think, like talking to you and having these conversations about how the film's impacting people outside of our region. Because I think there is the thing about this particular piece that I think might be more unique, besides the fact that queer history is incredibly important as we're saturated with non-queer history all the time. I feel like we have to queer the history, to use the term in the film. But like, I think that, it's a rural area, and like people had to take that much bigger of a step to come out to their neighbors than they would have lived in the gay, quote, neighborhood, village, ghetto, whatever it was called at any given era. So I think, if anything, there's a real story to be told around the rural space that queers have taken. And, Nelson is a shining example to me. I don't really know other queer communities in Canada that have the same robust, kind of vibrant, especially in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s. When I moved here, the community was very robust. And now it's almost as if when trans folks became more visible and started to claim their space, they have kind of been, integrated into our community in the same way that the lesbian, gay, and bisexual population was in the 80s and 90s and 2000s. So now we have this reputation here in this area in Nelson and the Kootenays of being very trans friendly. And so if you're a rural trans person, or you want to be a rural trans, or you don't want to live in a city, this is one of those spaces is okay to come to. There's infrastructure for you both medically, socially, community-wise. And now the Two-Spirited community is starting to be seen and understood a little bit better. But we're just at the beginning of all that. We're just at the beginning of really understanding what that experience even is as settlers. So it's interesting. So I think there's a huge dialogue to still create, and the film for sure has a lot of potential that way. So you've been in, boosting the potential of this being a, to keep going. It's no piece of art is ever really done. It's you just walk away from it. But I don't think anyone's walked away from this yet. We're still looking for ways to get it out there for sure.
Amy Bohegan, thank you so much for your time. Well said, well done, and well made.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Appreciate the spotlight you shine on all of the folks out here doing the work in whatever way they are.
That was my 2022 interview with writer, producer, and director Amy Bohegan. For more on this award-winning filmmaker, simply visit watershedproductions.ca. And to see Queering the Interior, simply Google Queering the Interior documentary and click on the first link that pops up, which will be a Watershed Productions link. And that link will take you to Queering the Interior. When did gay pride become just pride?
I can answer that for you, and I can answer where the big turnaround was, and it's a very simple thing. Corporatism is when gay pride became pride. As soon as we got corporate sponsors, as soon as we had the approval of the corporations around us, oh my God, the beer company's going to sponsor it and they're going to give us a float, and look at the telephone company's going to do something and someone else is going to do something.
But drop the gay.
Yeah, drop the gay and include everyone. And I always thought, why should we include everyone? This is a gay pride celebration. It is for people who are in a sexual minority. We had something that was for us to make people recognize who we are and to acknowledge that we actually existed.
Award-winning playwright and author Brad Fraser reflects on some important gay history. The time frame, the 1990s. When gay pride becomes pride, with the introduction of corporate sponsorships.
Hi, I'm songwriter and producer Jim Valance, and you are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.ca, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara and Rainbow Country. The podcast is available on all major platforms. And finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true, so believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you. Now, taking us out, the song La 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 from the world's most famous pornographic film, 1972's Deep Throat. And taking us to La La La, writer and director of Deep Throat, Gerard Damiano, talks about the legacy of 1972's Deep Throat.
I think it was the first time that anyone ever treated sex openly, honestly, humorously, as though we were doing nothing that we had to be ashamed about. It shows you if you're gay, it's okay to be gay. If you're heterosexual, it's okay to be heterosexual. Whatever it is that you feel like you want to do, whatever it is, don't be ashamed of it. Deep Throat did that.